Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1988 Disney animated film Oliver and Company. Now, Oliver and Company is, in my opinion, honestly, one of Disney's more underrated animated efforts. I think it's better than some critics make it out to be. I don't think it's a completely forgettable, lame, poor effort by Disney by any means. And also, I think its impact on Disney, specifically their animated output from the late 80s and all the way into the 90s and beyond, is very understated. And I will get to why I feel that way later on. Uh, Also, I do have a soft spot for Oliver and Company because I did grow up with this movie. I had this on VHS along with a lot of other Disney animated films, and it was one that I definitely did watch quite a bit. I wouldn't say that I watched it enough that it was like my favorite, but I did definitely watch it a fair number of times, and it was one that I would definitely consider on a rainy day. And I think it still holds up pretty well. In fact, there were certain aspects of it that I didn't really get as a kid. So as an adult, like it was honestly really cool to see certain layers and certain parts of this film and that I didn't really see before. Certain jokes that I didn't get, and also uh, a bit of an edge that actually surprised me, especially for a Disney film from around this time period. Now, before I go any further sharing my thoughts on the film, though, I want to give a special shout out yet again to Sean for requesting another review. And if there is another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal, my Patreon, or my Cash App. The links to all three are going to be in the video description down below. And I will try to get to your requests as soon as I possibly can. Now, the film is directed by George Scribner, and this was his first and his last feature film as a director. He directed The Prince and the Pauper after this and some other shorts for Disney, but he never directed a feature film again. Prior to Oliver and Company, he was known more as a animator. So he had animated segments of heavy metal and parts of American pop. He also worked on The Black Cauldron, and in television, he worked on shows like Transformers, The Smurfs. But his first shot at directing was with Oliver and Company, and I think for a first time director for a feature film for a major studio, I think he did a nice job. I wouldn't say that his direction was amazing or spectacular or stunning, but for the kind of film that Oliver and Company is, I think the direction worked, especially when it comes to really capturing the energy of the film and of its characters and he definitely did provide a certain level of professionalism. His experience as a animator definitely helped him here, and it led to some really nice looking shots in the film. It also led to the bits of action that you do have really having a good amount of balance to them. Things weren't too chaotic in the chase scenes or in some of the more frenetic moments in the film, whether it has to do with the action in the movie or something involving physical comedy. And I definitely do feel that the direction is at its best when it comes to really just following the hustle and bustle of New York City and really focusing on New York as its own character. and the various different characters in the film interacting with New York and its settings, and trying to stay one step ahead of the bad guys. And this is a film that definitely has a certain amount of charm to it visually, and I think that Scribner is a big part of why it has that. Also, I want to give George more credit because of the fact that initially he wasn't really going to be the sole director of this. He was going to be a co-director with another person, and then something happened, and that person left the project, and then George was basically just left on his own. And Oliver and Company actually is a project that went through a lot of issues in terms of pre-production, and it's honestly a achievement that the film turned out as good as it did, considering how much was going on in terms of changes to the script, changes to the director, changes to a multitude of different things. And George deserves a lot of credit for handling that really well. Being able to manage that tightrope and not falling to the ground below, which I think other directors might have actually done that. But I think his experience working with Disney and working with other types of animated projects, whether it's on television or for feature films, I think that definitely did enable him to be able to withstand the kind of pressure that he was under when it comes to directing Oliver and Company. Too bad, though, that it didn't really lead to him having much of a career when it comes to directing feature films after this, even though this film was a massive hit. It was a pretty significant hit for the studio for the time. But maybe he just didn't want to do anything else. And, if that's the case, more power to him. I don't know the full story. But I think George is definitely capable enough of directing more projects for Disney or other animated projects for other studios. And it just wasn't meant to be, apparently. I guess apparently he was going to co-direct The Lion King, but then it just did not happen. And then which is interesting because he was supposed to be a co-director on this, and then he became the main director, and then later on, The Lion King, he was supposed to be a part of it, and then that didn't work out. So Disney did try to get him to work on another project, to be fair, but it just didn't really pan out in the end. The film features a screenplay by Jim Cox, Timothy J. Disney, and James Mangold. And yes, that is the same James Mangold who would go on to direct Logan, and also Dial of Destiny for Disney years later. The screenplay, to me personally, is good, but it's chock full of a lot of missed potential to me. And it makes it a little bit of a letdown. It's still a film that I enjoy quite a bit, and really it's due to the strength of the voice cast, the music, the overall setting of the film. But the screenplay and the story, it's a little weak, and that's because there was so much about this film that was just completely cut out. Because the original vision for this movie was a lot darker, and Disney didn't want to have anything to do with that. They were like, no, that's too dark, that's too depressing, that's too bleak, that's too edgy for our rated G movie. So we can't have any of that. And you need to cut that out. But surprisingly enough, there still is some of that edge that's retained in this script, but it really does feel that Oliver and Company doesn't really have its full identity as a result. And also, it really doesn't help that there were a lot of things, a lot of different drafts, and just a lot of different sort of plots and subplots that were written, and they wound up being cut as well, or stuff was just replaced pretty much last minute. And so that definitely is something that affects the quality of the script in a multitude of ways. But I still think it's a decent enough script and story. In a lot of ways, it is a take on the classic bit of literature that is Oliver Twist, and it's fun to see a different take on that story. And I think it does a really good job in terms of making you sympathize with Oliver because nobody wants to adopt him. And when he's being, left in a box outside a shop at the beginning of the movie, and then the introduction of Dodger is really good. Like, it is just a very fun introduction with a great musical number, uh, which honestly, to me, is one of Disney's best songs. "Why Should I Worry" by Billy Joel. And then you have the stuff with Dodger and his gang, which I know All Dogs Go to Heaven came out around the same time, if I remember correctly. I don't know if it came out before or I think it came out around the same time or after this. But there's a lot of similarities to All Dogs Go to Heaven that are kind of interesting to me. And it almost doesn't sound like it's a coincidence. For instance, the gang of dogs and their place of residence, they hide out in a ship, in a wrecked ship. That's exactly the same hideout that the dogs had and all dogs go to heaven. And then on top of that, you have the stuff with just the little bit of the edgier, darker tone. You have this laid back, charismatic dog who's, has street smarts, very similar to Burt Reynolds' character in All Dogs Go to Heaven. And also you have Dom DeLuise who voices one of the characters in this. There's just a lot of things that you're kind of like, this kind of feels like Disney's All Dogs Go to Heaven. Like, they got access to the script somehow, and we're like, oh, we got to make something like this ourselves. I don't know the full truth behind that, but it does. It kind of has that vibe when it comes to the story and the way that the dog characters are written. I mean, even Rita is very similar to another character that's very very close to Rita in terms of her personality and All Dogs Go to Heaven. I mean, there's even like a showdown on a dock too. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you're kind of like, this seems like a little too familiar to just be a coincidence. Um, but one thing about the script that I think really needed some work is establishing the connection between Oliver and Dodger and just Oliver and the gang more. It just rushes through it so quickly. And as a result, like, you barely are able to get that invested in the gang and in Oliver and Dodger and their friendship and Dodger being in a lot of ways kind of a father figure for Oliver. Like, you don't really get a lot of that. There's not enough of that. And then with the villain, there isn't really enough to establish him that well either. And then the whole stuff with Fagin and him owing money to Sykes and you don't ever really know exactly how much he owes him. Like, you don't know why he wound up in this situation where he's using his dogs to steal money or steal things to sell to this gangster. Like, there's a lot of context that's missing. And it just continues as the film goes on when it comes to this missing context. And it definitely does affect the quality of the script, like Georgette and why she hates Oliver so much, despite barely even knowing him, being with this cat for maybe a day, and then all of a sudden she hates his guts and wants him gone. Like, then there's other stuff involving other characters, and I mean, even the stuff with Jenny and Oliver. Like, I get it. Oliver's a cute kitten, but like to have this kind of connection with this cat in such a short amount of time, and like 2 days, maybe three, it's kind of a stretch. And there's just a lot of elements of this script that just feel like there wasn't a lot of thought put into it, or there was, but they ran out of time, or things had to be cut, and then it just feels like at points this script and this story was definitely rushed. It was definitely rushed by Disney in order to get the product out. There are some good bits of dialogue between Oliver and Dodger and Tito and Einstein and Francis and Rita and Fagin and Georgette and all these other characters. Although a good chunk of it was improvised. In fact, uh, Dom De- uh, Dom DeLuise improvised most of his dialogue, as did Cheech Marin. But I don't know if Bette did. But I think there was a still some nice lines here and there. The plot, while it is rushed and really could have used more layers and a little bit more depth to it, a little bit more time with some of these characters, it does contribute to the film's tight pacing, which is definitely uh, not a bad thing because it's a pretty quick film and it never really gets boring as a result. Um, and that edge is still maintained, though. Not to the same extent as the original script, though. I mean, it was pretty dark. It actually had an origin for Oliver where his family was murdered by Sykes's dogs. And Oliver, he's got his own motivation to stop Sykes because he wants to get revenge for the death of his parents. But Disney was like, that's a little too intense, so we're not going to have any of that. There was also some other stuff involving like Rita, where she would get damaged. She would get hurt, or she would get killed by Sykes's dogs or Sykes himself. But Disney, was like, no, it's too intense. That's too violent. Cut that down. And there were other characters, like I think it was Francis. I think it was either Einstein or Francis that were going to have more screen time. They were going to have more of an extended role in the plot, but that didn't really go anywhere. There was this other subplot involving a panda, where that was going to be what Fagin stole from a zoo to use as ransom, or Sykes stole the panda, and Fagin and the gang went to rescue the panda. But instead, later on, they changed that whole thing to essentially be the Jenny subplot, which I think was the right choice because the panda thing would have just been weird, and I don't think that would have worked very well. But there are still some things that were pretty much still there from the beginning that were kept for the final draft of the film. While the darker version would not have been as profitable, I still would have loved to have seen that because you see some really good glimpses of that when it comes to some of the scenes with Sykes and his dogs, or the climax, the finale of the film, where Sykes, not only does Sykes get blown up by a train, but his dogs get tossed off the train, and one of them even gets electrocuted on the train tracks. That's definitely something that is pretty edgy for a rated G film. And there's also some 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 lines and some humor that is more adult orientated, to say the least, than for kids. So I think there are definitely some moments where it's got some bite to it, and I think that's definitely something that really helps it stand out from other Disney films uh, that have, a dog and a cat, and they go on an adventure together. Like, this is not 101 Dalmatians, so to speak. There's definitely more of a bite to it than a film like that. But I do have to admit that it's a film that could have used the Don Bluth approach. It could have used a little bit more of a bite, even more of an edge. But as it is, I still think the script is fine. It still works well enough, but I think it genuinely could have been a classic story though, and a classic Disney script. It just needed to have a stronger plot with uh, more depth to the characters, and I think that really would have made it into uh, a a genuinely great film instead of a good one, a good entertaining movie. I think the voice cast, for the most part, fares a lot better than the script. I think it's a much more consistently a good aspect of this film. So you have Joey Lawrence, who plays Oliver. He voices Oliver, and he does a good job giving this kitten some spunk, some charm, some personality, as well as doing a good job providing the right amount of emotions for the the character throughout the story. But I think that there definitely were some other voice actors in this cast that were bigger standouts, and one of them is Billy Joel, surprisingly enough. Like, he was really good in this. I thought he did a great job voicing Dodger. He really was very believable, very at home playing this streetwise uh, dog who knows New York City like the back of his paw. And I think he did a good job with the gruff nature of the character, as well as the sweeter side of him. And then, of course, the vocals, which, Billy Joel is one of the best. So he definitely added a lot to the film and to Dodger, by giving him his voice. Cheech Marin was fun as Tito. He improvised like 75% of his dialogue, and he's a big part of why this film is actually still pretty entertaining and rather funny to watch as an adult because of Cheech Marin and his improvised dialogue and his comic chops. Richard Mulligan was fine as Einstein, but the character didn't really have a lot to do. Same thing goes for Roscoe Lee Brown as Francis. Um, Cheryl Lee Ralph was also adequate as Rita, but the character was not really that well fleshed out, which is interesting because initially in an earlier draft, this character was much more important, had much more of a vital a part of the story, and the studio was even really trying to court like a major star at the time to voice this character. They were actually trying to get Tina Turner to voice Rita, or they were going to call the dog Tina, but Tina turned it down. So then they whittled the role down, and then ultimately gave the job to Cheryl Lee Ralph. Dom DeLuise, he voices Fagin, and this was, according to Dom, one of his favorite roles of his entire career, actually, because he always wanted to do a Disney film. and this was his opportunity to do that, and he really loved and enjoyed being a part of this production, and you could definitely hear that with his voiceover work in this. And Torrin Block and Carl Weintraub, they voiced Roscoe and DeSoto, and I think the two of them did a really fine job voicing those two bullies. And then, speaking of bullies, you got Robert Loggia as the villain Sykes, and Loggia is just so good at voicing these sinister characters, and this is no exception. Like his voice just oozes venom, and he's very strong in this. Natalie Gregory was fine too as Jenny, although the role was just kind of there. Didn't have a ton to do for most of it. Um, in fact, there's a good chunk of the film where either she's not even a part of the plot or she's being kidnapped. Uh, and then I definitely want to mention Bette Midler, who voiced Georgette, and I think this was her first time voicing an animated character, and she was right at home. Her over the top personality, she did great job embodying the snootiness of this vain and spoiled poodle. And her comedic chops definitely came into play as well when she was playing off of Cheech Marin. So yeah, I do think for the most part it's a really good voice cast. It's also edited by Mark Hester and James Melton, and I think the editing is efficient. Although there are some moments where you can kind of tell that maybe something was chopped, some things were cut, some things were trimmed down to get a certain rating or to tighten up the pacing. The music is by J.A.C. Redford. It's not a original score that I would really consider to be that strong, but it's okay. The best aspect of the film, though, is the songs that they use for the soundtrack. There's a song by Huey Lewis that they used for the opening of the film. In fact, I'm just gonna look up the soundtrack real quick. Um, yeah, Once Upon a Time in New York City by Huey Lewis, and then of course you got Why Should I Worry by Billy Joel, which is one of my favorite songs from Billy, and honestly one of my favorite Disney songs. Like I could listen to that over and over again and never really get tired of it. Streets of Gold by Ruth Pointer, that's a good one. Perfect Isn't Easy by Bette Midler, which was written by Barry Manilow, actually. He produced it. Um, you also have um, other other songs too. I Could Have Danced All Night, which Cheech Marin, did. Good Company, which I think is a very sweet song by Ron Rocha and Rob Minkoff, performed by Mina Tran. So yeah, it's a good soundtrack. It's a great soundtrack, actually. I think that is easily one of the best aspects of Oliver and Company, and one of the biggest selling points of the film is its soundtrack. Other than the animation and the voice cast. And despite mixed reviews, the film was a big hit in the box office. I mean, it made over $121 million worldwide on a $31 million budget. So it was a pretty sizable hit for Disney. Um, and it made a lot more on home video. In fact, it made $10 million on home video when it was eventually released in 1996. The 80s was not very kind to Disney when it comes to their animated films. And this was really the first one that made Disney realize that, okay, there's still hope here. We can still lean on our animated films. We can still garner a good amount of profit from our animated output. And we're not done yet with this. And I think that the success of Oliver and Company really emboldened Disney and really gave them the confidence to go on to do films like The Little Mermaid, to do films like The Lion King and Aladdin, because it solidified the fact that it was profitable. And because of that, its impact is very underrated. Because you could make an argument, you could make a legit argument. If this flopped, Disney would have really probably moved even farther into the realm of doing more live action films and really just doing more animation for television, with the occasional animated film here and there. Because Disney was already struggling with their animated films making that much of a profit. Like The Great Mouse Detective is actually a pretty good movie, but it didn't do that great financially. And there was a lot of other instances of films that Disney did in the 80s, specifically animated films, The Black Cauldron, that underperformed. So if this also underperformed, that definitely would have changed their mindset. And also, when you look at just the overall state the company was in the 80s and how precarious the animation department was in particular, um, this is definitely a significant film when it comes to Disney and their path going forward. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on Oliver and Company. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.